Good to see everyone this evening. We just finished with Hebrews 11. We call Hebrews 11 the household of faith. Talked about all those people that had all that great faith. And then Paul, the writer of Hebrews, whoever want to take that to be, the writer of Hebrews moves into 12 with therefore. Because you've got all those people who did all these great things, because you're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, the Hebrew writer says. You know, I think to them, writing to these Jews, talking about all these Jews throughout history, which is what basically we just did in 11, talked about all these, if you want to say Hebrews, throughout history, all the way back to Cain and Abel, right, all the way through Abraham, all the way forward. To them, they had this great cloud of witnesses that they had read about and studied about their entire life, you know. To them, it was right there. It was real. It was something they totally understood. Now, you and I, you know, we understand that. We've read the Old Testament. We've been to VBS. We know a lot of the stories, don't we? And so we see that faith of the Old Testament, I think. And, you know, maybe we have some relationship to that. But I think it's one of those things that when I read this, to me, personally, you know, I think about the witnesses and the faith that surrounded me in my life, you know. It's one thing to know about something that happened 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, or, you know, 5,000 years ago or whatever. But it's another thing to be surrounded by people of great faith in your life that are real and alive and now, you know. People that you admire and you look up to, and people that you think, you know, man, I wish I had their faith, right? And so when I get to this part of Hebrews, to me, I always think in my life of the people that I've been surrounded by that had great faith. I mean, the people in Hebrews 11, don't get me wrong, they had a lot of faith. They were looking towards Christ, right? The Hebrew writer even wants to make us think they were looking towards heaven, a city whose architect and builder is God. He wants us to, they were even looking past Canaan, past the Messiah. They were looking all the way to heaven, like you and me look towards heaven. And that's a good thought. And I don't negate the inspiration of the Bible. But a lot of those people, to me, I don't know that they looked that far ahead like you and I do, you know. Heaven to us is, to a Jew, you had the promise of Abraham, right? You had the land. You had the descendants. You had the blessing of Abraham, right? In your seed, all nations shall be blessed. Isn't that really what Abraham was promised, really? I mean, isn't that, if you had to, what exactly was Abraham promised? Draw the contract up, right? He was promised the land of Canaan, right? He was promised descendants as numerous as the sand of the sea and the stars in the sky. And he was promised that in his seed, all nations shall be blessed. That was a promise Abraham received. And to the Jew, to the Hebrew, like Gary says, sometimes we get kind of caught up in the terminology, don't we? Hebrew, Jew, Israelite, you know. What does that really mean, right? Well, they were Hebrews, right? And we really don't know where that word came from. They were Hebrews, and we take that to be Semitic speakers. Pre-Egypt, you would say, Hebrews, but it's really in Egypt where they really became the Hebrew people. But it was Israel because of Jacob, right? Jacob's name was changed to Israel and the 12 sons, and that really kind of defined it as Israel. And then we call them Jews, of course, because of the tribe of Judah, because it came through Judah. Christ came through Judah. And Judah is a tribe that survived the centuries, not Israel. Generally, in the Old Testament, right, after we divide the kingdom, after Jeroboam and Rehoboam, after Solomon, when the kingdom divides, we say Judah and Israel, right, in the Old Testament. Israel was the northern tribes, the 10 tribes, And then Judah was the southern tribes. And Benjamin was kind of tucked in there, but we don't really talk about Benjamin. So we talk about the northern tribes, or the lost tribes, the Israelites, the 10 tribes, and then we talk about Judah. But by the time of Jesus, it was Israel again, because that's just kind of how the terminology went. So however you want to look at that, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that to me, personally, I've known so many people in my life that have had such a great influence on me spiritually, you know, what I consider people of great faith. Interestingly, most of the people in my life that I consider to have great faith didn't have much else. They were people who didn't have a lot. Didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of possessions. A lot of the people in my life that I consider to have great faith had a lot of adversity. Weren't people I would say were really blessed people, if you want to look at it that way. People who had had a lot of diversity, either with health and family and death. And yet in spite of that, they looked towards heaven, looked towards Christ. And I think when you think about that, it helps me to be better, you know. The Bible says iron sharpens iron, right? And I think that's true. To be around people who have great faith, it helps my faith. But I think if you define faith, it's kind of interesting what Buck was talking about. We're all kind of different, ain't we, you know? Some people want to dance and raise their hands, and some people don't. And some people want it to be real emotional, want it to be real. Some people don't, you know. I guess we're all different, aren't we? Maybe what we want or what we desire, what we think God should provide. When Buck was talking about that, I thought about me, you know. I feel like I have great faith, and I feel like I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm not an extremely emotional person usually. It's just not how I'm built, you know. And if you know me, you kind of know that's who I am. I've never desired in my life. I've never desired to speak in tongues. I've never desired to have a miraculous gift. I don't desire that. I never have desired that. I just never have. I just don't want it. I don't need it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I don't need that to be the spiritual person that I want to be. I don't need proof. I don't need God to make some miraculous sign in my life to convince me that God's God and Christ is Christ. I just don't need it. I don't desire it. I don't want it. You know, I've often thought it would be nice to have the gift of healing, wouldn't it? I've lost people in my life that I cared a lot for. Watched them die right in front of me. Talk about pray and pray, right? Watched them die in front of me. I've often thought, boy, wouldn't it be nice to be able to just tell them to take up their bed and walk, get up and go on about their life? Wouldn't that be nice? You know, I've known people in my life that have never spoke a word. I've known people in my life that have never walked. I've known people in my life that can't hear, can't see. Boy, wouldn't that be great? Be able to walk up and say, here you go, you can see or hear or walk. Well, that would be magnificent, wouldn't it? Would it? Really? You know, it's funny in the Bible, Jesus, I guess I'm getting off topic a little bit. Jesus always said, I do the will of my Father, didn't he? It's not me, right? It's not me. I'm doing the will of my Father. Will of who sent me. You know, we kind of know by the time that Jesus hung on the cross, Joseph was dead, which Joseph could have been pretty old. We don't know, right? I mean, possible. But Joseph was dead, his own father. And I've often wondered if we could talk to Jesus. A question I'd like to ask him is, why did you heal your own father? Right? I mean, he had to have a good relationship, I would think, with him. Well, I guess that wasn't God's will, was it? You know, so I've often thought, well, what if you could heal? Right? Well, you know, I watched my sister die, but what if God's will was me to heal the drug addict next door and let my sister die? You see? Because God's will isn't my will. Does that make sense? You know, my will's selfish. I'll be honest. My will is selfish. I want to heal the people I love, heal the people I care about. I want to fix what's wrong in my life first. Not that I don't care about other people. I'm just being honest, right? Maybe that's not God's will. You know, there's responsibility with anything that you possess, isn't there? And maybe I'm off subject, but as Buck was talking, it was something I really thought a lot about. And maybe you don't feel the way I feel, and that's okay, because I don't have all the answers. But that's just kind of how I feel about it. In Hebrews, he talks about these witnesses, people who had this faith that was maybe bigger than the people around them, right? How do you know somebody has faith? Right? How do you know that? Can you just look at somebody? By their actions. Right? More than that, though, and I agree, by their actions, but how they respond to the world, to their world. Would you agree with that? How they respond to their world. Right? Because everybody responds differently to tragedy and adversity in their life. We all cope in different ways. And we all have to rationalize within our being how this all works. Right? And that's hard to do sometimes, isn't it? But a person with great faith always looks towards God. A person that doesn't have great faith, they don't. That's my best answer. A person who doesn't have great faith looks to something else. Looks to their self, looks to another person, looks to a philosophy or a theology other than God. The Hebrew writer says that because we have people of great faith, that we should be able to throw off what hinders us and the sin that entangles us and run with perseverance the race marked out for us. The race marked out for us. You see what he says there? You see, we don't all have the same race in life, do we? We don't all have the same race. It's our race. Your race isn't mine. My race isn't yours. We might share some of it with each other. We might talk about it. We might empathize with each other. But you're never going to have my race. And I'm never going to have your race. It's never going to happen. It's my race. And how I deal with it reflects on my faith in God, and it reflects on how I deal with my world. And in the end, that reflects upon me, doesn't it? How I deal with my world. Not your world, not somebody else's world, but mine. How much of our life do we spend talking about other people, about other things? What's the most difficult subject for us to talk about? Ourselves, isn't it? The most difficult thing for me to talk about is me. And I'm the best at earth at not doing it. I really am good. You can ask my wife. She'll vouch for me about this. Because I can change the subject faster than anybody on this planet. Right? Because when I don't want to talk about something, I try to find a way not to talk about it. Right? Because it's uncomfortable. Because I don't want to talk about my demons. I like to talk about yours. Right? And I like to talk about other people's. But I don't like talking about mine. Because when I talk about mine, it means I have to do something about it, right? I have to deal with it. I have to come up with a solution. You know how hard it is for me to fix me? It's almost impossible, right? And so when I have this in my life and I have my race that I have to run, that I can't put it off on somebody else. I can't blame anybody else. I can't change the subject when it comes to me. I have to run the race that's marked out for me, that I have to run. And whatever that means in my life, whether that means losing someone or whether that means whatever it means, I have to run. It doesn't mean mine's any harder than yours, right? Doesn't mean my race is any harder than your race or your race is any harder than my race, because every one of us, we're going to have our demons. Every one of us are going to have our trials. Every one of us are going to have things we're going to have to deal with. And if you haven't dealt with it, you're going to have to. I'm just throwing that out there, right? But we all have to run it for us. And the way we do that is, and I think the Hebrew writer says there's two things here working. One thing is I have to look at people of great faith that surround me. And the other thing is I have to look at Jesus. Those two things are what make me run my race. If I don't have that around me, then I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to run this race. I'm going to fail. It's really hard when people say, people kind of hold their faith up, like, look at me, you know. Look at how spiritual I am, how faithful I am. And you know, they've never really went through. I remember one time I was talking to a guy, and he said, and he's talking about God and faith, and he says, you know, I've never really had much trials in my life. He says, my parents are all still alive. My siblings are all still alive. My kids are all healthy. Got a good job. Just had a pretty good life. And I'm thinking, well, how do you know? Right? I mean, because faith is, it's about things that don't go right, things that don't go good, things that hurt, things that some people don't make it through. Faith is something that you have to prove, see. That's what the Bible says. It's perseverance. It's making it through the hard times in life by looking at Christ. And I've known people that went to church every Sunday of their life, every Wednesday, every Sunday night. People that never missed. I'm not going to name names. I could. I've known people that lived that life and had a tragedy, one big tragedy in their life, and quit going. I mean people who were steady. I mean people who were here. I mean Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, people who didn't miss. People that I looked up to, thought, man, nothing's going to shake them. And they're not here. And I know people who have had terrible tragedy. Some of you sitting right here with me tonight, and you're still here. Faith is about making it through. Christianity is about finishing. Anybody can start. Starting's easy. Christianity is about finishing. It's about finishing your race all the way to the end. And that's what he's saying. Because we have to look at the goal. We have to look at the joy that's set before us. This is a very interesting passage in the Greek. it really doesn't read like it reads in your Bible. And it's hard, I guess, to put it in an English way that really would make sense. But basically what it means is, for the joy he knows existed because he already had it. You know what I'm saying? He already had it. He left it, didn't he? He left glory. He left that to come here, to be an example to us that whatever happens in this life, nothing's more important than heaven. That was our example, right? Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so you will not grow weary and lose heart. Finishing. You know, people say, well, Paul didn't write Hebrews, and maybe he didn't. But this particular little piece of Hebrews looks a lot like Paul, doesn't it? You know, looks a lot like Paul. I mean, I'm not saying Paul wrote Hebrews. Matter of fact, he probably didn't. But this little piece of Hebrews, when you read this little thing, it sounds like Paul. For one thing, Paul loves therefores. He uses them all the time. And the other thing is the race, right? Paul's all about races and finishing and endurance and perseverance. This little piece of Hebrews sounds like Paul. And it's kind of inspiring, isn't it? It's a place that you go to and you think that's kind of inspiring when you get to that particular point. We as Christians, as individuals, we have to surround ourselves with people of faith, and we have to lean on that faith, and we have to focus on Christ in spite of whatever happens in this life. You cannot always explain what happens to you in this life. You might want to, and people try to, but you can't. I can't, and you can't. When people come and say, Rex, why did this happen? I don't know. I don't know. Why do good people die young? I don't know. Why do babies die? I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. You know, a 4-year-old kid blew away in a bounce house in Texas and died. Why does that happen? I don't know why that happens. I have a clue. Right? But the truth is it does. We live in a broken world, don't we? We live in a broken world that's has evil and has death and has misery and has things we don't understand and has wars. Right? I can't explain all that. I don't have the answers. I don't know why people who should have kids, that would be wonderful parents, can't have kids, and people who are on drugs have 5 kids. I don't understand. I don't know. You tell me. I don't know. You know? Why do good marriages fail? Why do babies die? I don't know. But I don't drive the bus. You know? I mean, I just don't. But I know who does. And I know in the end it's all going to be okay. And I think that's faith. Right? Paul says in Romans 8, all things work together for good to those who love the Lord, called according to his purpose. Well, I believe that. And it doesn't mean all things are good, but I believe that. And I think when you come to the understanding that there's so much more to us in this life than this life. I think when you really understand that, it helps you to see. I shouldn't use the word insignificant, but I really want to. The insignificance of a lot of the things that go on in this world. In the end, right? In the end, God has it. And you and I as Christians have to have that faith. Anybody can jump in here anytime they want. Yeah. Because you never know, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, you never know. You just don't. You know, I pray for my kids every day. But, you know, I just can't. I always tell people that. I say, you know, you say you can forgive anything. Your faith, you would stay with God regardless of what happens. I've had people tell me that, you know, like I'm immovable. And I say, when I was in college, I went to this Stephen King. I'm not a Stephen King fan, trust me. I'm not even a horror fan. But it was kind of required. I had to go to one of these lectures, and one of these was Stephen King. And this has been back in the 80s, you know, because I'm old. And Harold said I can say that now. And so it's back in the 80s. We go to the Stephen King, and he's really very interesting, actually. He's a very intelligent guy, you know. And he was talking about, he said, I was going to write this book. And he said, there was these guys, and there was in this bathroom in this airport, and it was a women's bathroom, and the wives kept going in, but nobody was coming out. So pretty soon there was all these men standing around this waiting for their wives or their girlfriends or whatever to come out of this bathroom, and nobody was coming out. So finally this one guy, he gets brave and decides he's going to go in there and figure out what's going on, right? So he goes in there, and there's nobody in the bathroom. But this one stall's kind of got this eerie glow, you know? So he's real cautious, and he goes up, and he opens the door. And he says, but I never wrote this novel because I had no idea what was behind the door, right? And that's always stuck with me in life, you know? We don't know what's behind the door. You never know what's behind the door. You just don't know, right? And when you really think about that, it's scary. Because I think the hardest thing is we realize how little control we actually have over the things in our life, right? I mean, we like to be in control. Am I right? We like to be in control of things, don't we? We like to have it under control. We like to think we're in charge. We like to think we're driving the bus, right? But at the end of the day, I have control over just almost nothing in my life. I don't. Do you? You know, when you get in that car and drive down the street, you got control of that car. You're driving it. You got it. You might be the best driver on earth, right? But are you controlling that other guy? Right? Can you control your health? Can you add any time to your life? Can you control what might already be growing inside of you right now or inside of me right now? Can we control that? No, we can't. We can't. And when you really sit down and realize how little control you actually have over your life or my life or anybody's life, then you start looking to God, who's driving that bus. You start looking to Him because you know He has control. We don't.
Isn't that why there's the book of Job and Job, Bob, Tim, and Sam? Because there was one guy with that kind of faith.
Yeah. Well, Job's faith was, you know, Job had a
good outlook.
Yeah. And I really don't want this to be a downer class. And I guess it kind of has been. But I guess what I want to say is that when we surround ourselves with people who have gone through things, who have flourished in spite of adversity, right? Who have overcome tragedy and yet have great faith, that is inspirational to us. Should be as Christians, that we have people around us who have survived, right? Who have flourished in spite of adversity. And we have Jesus who hung on a cross to look to say, regardless of what happens here, everything's going to be okay. And I think when we do that, it should move us to a higher plane of spirituality. Prayer should be much more important to us. Buck says, well, we need to pray like it changes things. Well, absolutely we do. Because I'm praying to change things. I'm praying for tomorrow. Are you praying for tomorrow? I'm praying for tomorrow. I'm praying for a week from now. I'm praying for a year from now. I'm praying for this church for tomorrow and next week and next year and for this church after I'm dead. I'm praying for my children. I'm praying for you. I'm praying for things. I'm praying for tomorrow. I'm not praying about now. I'm praying for tomorrow. I'm praying for your health and your prosperity and your well-being in this church for tomorrow. Because I believe with all my heart prayer counts and God can change things, and I believe that. And I don't need, and the reason I believe it is because I've seen it in my life, and I've seen it in the life of people around me who had great faith. And that's why I believe in these things. My personal experience has led me to the point that I know God can make things happen. And that's what prayer's about. And when you know that, and the things in your life that God has done, that you've saw God's hand in, when I doubt my faith, I look back to those things where I know God has had a hand in making those things happen. When, you know, the greatest thing in my life, the biggest thing in my life, I think, that is when I was a young kid. I wasn't very popular, and I didn't have many girlfriends. I have many girlfriends, right? And I wasn't real popular of a person. I'm just being honest. I was the last person that got picked for stuff. I didn't have a lot of friends. Most of my friends were people that nobody else wanted to be friends with. You know what I mean? That was me. And as a kid growing up, as a young kid, you know what I prayed for? I prayed to find the right woman. I prayed to find a woman that would make me complete, and as I got bigger in my faith, and I prayed to find truth in God. That's something I wanted. If you know my background, you know I was raised very bi-religiously, right? I was half Catholic, half Baptist. I was a Catholicist, right? And I knew that wasn't right. And I knew there was something more, and I prayed for that. At 12 years old, I remember praying, laying in a car, praying to God with all my heart, praying that I could find the truth of God's Word, praying that I could find a woman, a spouse, somebody that would love me. And you know, I was just talking a minute ago, and we moved to Oklahoma against my will. I know we're out of time. Against my will, we moved to Oklahoma to a little place I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be here. To a school I didn't want to go to, little bitty old Graham. I didn't want to go there. Wanted to go to Henrietta, begged to go to Henrietta. Made me go to Graham. I hated it. I hated it all, right? I hated not being able to snow ski. I hated being in Podunk, Oklahoma. I hated being in the dirt. I hated being in that little bitty school. I hated it all. But I met the woman who changed my life and who changed my faith. And you know, if I hadn't been where I was and met the woman that I met, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you tonight. I guarantee it. So when people say, well, Rex, God doesn't answer prayer, I say, bohunk. Because in my life, God has answered prayer. And when I think, in my mind, well, that prayer ain't mattering, Rex. God's not changing things. That prayer's not working. I think, you know what, Rex? You know better. Because you know He answered the biggest prayer you ever prayed. You know He hears you. You know He can change tomorrow. You know, that's my story. So, look for people. Surround yourself with people who have been through it. Who have been through it. And are still here. Because one day, you will go through it, if you haven't. One day, you're going to get that call at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You're going to go to that doctor. Your loved one's going to go to that doctor. We all are. And we have to be ready to face it. And the only way we're ever going to be ready to face it is to be here, to be in God's Word, and to surround ourselves with people who have gone through it, and to keep our eyes on Christ. Otherwise, you're right. We will be the one who falls away. Because we'll say, God, how could you ever let that happen to me? And I just can't go anymore. Thanks for your time. We're out of time.